Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Gem Hawkes and I'm here with you today to talk about Into the Woods. It's a beautiful colour alloy collection, and what you get with Into the Woods is a selection of your most beautiful Jessie James beads. You've got classical crystals, you've got metal spacers, you've got all of the beauties that I'm going to show you in just a second, but you also get a selection of Dakota Stone's genuine gemstone beads. Now, if we have not met before, my name is Gem. As I say, I'm based in the United Kingdom and I love to work with wire, with gemstones and with Jessie James beads. So what I'd like to do is show you what we're looking to make together today and give you a closer look at this gorgeous, gorgeous bead mix. So this is the piece that we're going to make today. It's a bar necklace with a fancy cabochon set featuring my unique Loki bail up at the top here. Now, I've made a sample for you today using square 18 gauge wire and half round 22 gauge wire. However, I'm going to demonstrate both with the square and with a slightly easier round wire variation as well. I'll show you what that will look like in both instances. So all of the beads across the top here, the spacers and everything, you get in the beautiful colour alloy Into the Woods blend. And you also receive the gorgeous Dakota Stones collection, including incredible smoky quartz. We'll talk about the gemstones when I've opened those out as well. It's lovely to have both of those together. I've also added in some heavy hammered chain because it's fantastic. And also a little extra, I've added on one of these fantastic magnetic clasps. Now, if you are sensitive to electromagnetics, you would need to be taking your healthcare practitioner's advice before using one of these. So if you have a device in your body, such as a pacemaker, please don't wear pieces of jewellery with magnetics in them. However, there are gajillions of different clasps that you could use in this design instead. I've also added a tiny bit of round 18 gauge up at the top to create the connector here and also the bar across the top. But I will take you through every step of the design today, featuring the colour alloy Into the Woods from Jessie James Beads. Before we kick off with today's free tutorial, what I'd like to do is show you around both the Jessie James Beads selection and the fantastic Dakota Stone selection that you get with Into the Woods. Let's have a look at what you're going to receive in this pack. So I've popped all of the gorgeous upper pack selection into the larger of my two dishes. You have got a fabulous collection of frankly mahoosive champagne toned bicones. We've got pumpkin spacers, we've got saucers in a couple of different designs, your classic bead caps. You've got some fantastic, and now I'm not sure what they are, they look all the world like perhaps coated hematite. They're fabulous little rondelles with a bronzy colour. These absolutely gorgeous fancy crystal checker cut spacer beads as well. Those are fabulous. You get a really big collection to work with. And you've got those oblongs as well, which are fantastic to use. Really, really great angular designs. You've got a classic smooth saucer disc spacer, and they're really neat, as well as these gorgeous, it's almost an imperial colour, AB coated, faceted crystal rondelle. So lots and lots of your beautiful Jessie James beauties in the top there. Let's pop that over to one side. And then from Dakota Stones, you've got a collection of gemstones. If we refer to the packaging, you'll see that we have got bronzite, which are these ones. Bronzite's a fascinating gemstone. It's got a really lovely energy to it, not just because it's rolling around on the board. It's fantastic if you get the opportunity to work with bronzite. You do get a really rich chocolatey and caramel combination. We've also got fire opal. So those bigger ones in there, and smoky quartz. Now for me, the most exciting ones in here, no disrespect to my other gems inside the mix, you've got some incredible, beautiful smoky stones here. I love working with smoky quartz because it gives you a whole different dimension. Wherever you would work with a black gemstone, either shiny or matte, if you pop in the gorgeous sultry tones of smoky quartz. You get a really different, slightly elegant feel, very grown-up feel with this gemstone. It's an absolute beaut, and the 2 cabs that I received to work with have been absolutely perfect. Really, really gorgeous. So I'm just going to pop those back into the dish for a second, and I'm going to talk to you about the wires that I'm going to work with. Now, I had in my stash some half round 22 gauge wire. This is a medium temper, which is what I'm using to wrap across the cabochon and to create a little bit of interest up at the neckline of the piece. I also have some 18 gauge square wire. Now, these are both Beadalon medium tempers. It's called German style, and that's what I'm going to show you today. Now, if you don't have the square wire, I'm also going to show you how that will look if you just use an 18 gauge round wire in a similar design. You'll be able to see if they look similar or what the differences are. One thing I would say is it's just a little more challenging to work with square wire if you're brand new to wire working. If you have a little experience, then you go for it. You choose whichever you want to. It's absolutely all good. So let's take a closer look at the piece we're going to create together today, and maybe take the opportunity to get rid of the dog hair. Fabulous. So as I say, I've added in some chain. You could add in almost anything you wanted to. You could use some more of the beads on beading thread to create a soft necklace. I quite like the idea of a bar down at the base with a central focal cabochon wrap, and then this beautiful heavy chain up at the top. In addition to that, I've got a side fastening. Sometimes my shoulder is a little bit tricky and I struggle to close necklaces at the back, so having a fastening that's on the side or the front is really helpful to me. Plus, it's a really beautiful magnetic fastening that just makes life super, super easy. I've just made a tiny extender in here with some 18 gauge round wires. So those are your materials. Again, you could use whatever you wanted for the back of your design. You could do some macrame, you could use fairy silk, you could use whatever you fancied. Even a lovely thick kumihimo would be beautiful also. What we're going to focus on today is this central piece featuring my unique Loki bail design. Now, if you wanted to, this is a standalone piece, and as we go through I'll show you what that looks like if it is just by itself, and you simply thread that onto a necklace or a cord or whatever you fancy. I'm also going to show you just very quickly how to pop this onto a bar necklace if you wanted to recreate the design in its entirety. So let's have a look at our feature gemstone that we're going to work with today. If I pop this up in the corner, hopefully we'll just be able to see the salient piece of information, which is that section up at the top. This beautiful, beautiful smoky quartz. Now, as I mentioned to you, working with a square wire is just a slightly bit more challenging than working with a round wire in the same size. So I'm going to show you both of these design ideas. What we're looking to do is to create a basic shape that sits around that gemstone cabochon and has a little gap up at the top, and the gap enables us to add some detail, a little bit of weaving up in the top corner there, and also enables us to just have a little bit of drama as well. So we can open the Loki bail ears out, well, they're technically helmet horns, and just pop a gemstone onto that bar section up at the top. It's a really nice way to add a little bit of drama. One thing I would say before we go any further is I have very purposefully mixed all of my metals today. I'll just bring the whole thing back in for a second. You'll see that I'm using a silver colour square wire with a bronze colour half round wire, with a copper colour extending bar, with antiqued silver metals. So I'm mixing everything up together, and I think it works really effectively with the antique gold tones that is common in the metal sections of the Jessie James Beads collection. So let's just pop that back up into the corner for a moment. So I'm going to show you both with square and with round wire how to generate this piece. If you are newer to wire, then maybe go for a nice soft round wire, which is where we're going to start off today. So I'm going to unspool around about 10 inches of 18 gauge round wire. Now this is raw copper, which is lovely and soft. Let's pop that back out of the way for a second. And what that means is it's really easy for us to work with. It gives us an opportunity to get a really perfect replica of the edge of our gemstone piece. So I'm going to just grip hold of one end, warm that wire through 3 or 4 times to get a really lovely, smooth, fluid and straight piece of wire to work with. I'll show you again the shape that we're looking to create to begin with. So this is in the square 18 gauge medium temper, and I'm demonstrating right now with round 18 gauge in a soft wire. So I'm going to pay particular attention to warming that central section. And then with the round wire, this is why I love working with copper, I can very simply press the cab into the desk and use it to help me form that shape. Now, quartz is a really good natured gemstone. Smoky quartz is one variant of the quartz family. There are several, and the more you delve into it, the more interesting they get. Smoky quartz is a beautiful gemstone. It's also the national gemstone of Scotland, sometimes known as the Cairngorm stone. So let me just circle that wire around so that we get a reasonably accurate shape to follow. Now you can see that with that soft copper wire, it's really simple to get that shape to follow around. So I don't want it to be overly tight. I'm going to need to be able to get my 22 gauge wire between the gemstone cab and that outer wire that surrounds it. So what I would do is just open that out slightly, and all I'm doing is I'm pushing these 2 outer wires just in together a little bit until I get the shape and the size that I want. So you can see there's a little bit of space between the cab now and the wire. So I'm going to create the form that I'm going to work with. And all I will do is I'll create 2 uprights at the sides and leave a small gap at the centre. I'm right dominant, so what I tend to do is just flip the whole thing over and repeat on the second side. So I'm going to pop those pliers in again and push my second upright. I think probably these are going to be quite close together, but I'm not overly going to be stressed about it while I'm teaching today. You might like to take a little longer and get those just a little further apart. Overall, I'm quite happy with that shape and that form. The next thing that you'll need to do is to make sure that the first ½ inch or so of that upright is really good and straight, but we don't want to overtax it because we will be bending it in a little while. So I'm just going to make sure that that first little section is nice and straight, and that I'm happy overall with that shape and form. Returning your wire to the gemstone is key in getting a good fit. So whilst forming that shape around the cabochon is one of the most basic parts of any tutorial when I'm setting a cabochon in wire, it's also one of the most key. It's something that when you start weaving around it, you're very limited in your options of how you can alter that later. So taking a couple of minutes now, a couple of extra minutes than you think you might need, is really key in creating a piece of jewellery that you can be super proud of, happy to gift, happy to sell, happy to wear, happy to display. So do take a couple of extra minutes to make sure that the form you're creating with your wire around the outside of your cab is as perfect as you can possibly get it. So we've achieved a reasonably good facsimile of that gemstone in wire. What I'm going to do now is show you the same thing but in square. So I have here a reel of my 18 gauge square. This is German style medium temper. I'm going to find the end and I'm going to use around about the same length again, so it's about 10 inches or so, and I'm just going to trim that away carefully, pop that down on the board and put the excess out of the way. Now the first thing that square wire wants to do when you begin to handle it is twist. So what I'm going to do is take a couple of minutes to familiarise myself with that wire. I am putting an intention of heat into the wire as I'm moving. What I'm looking to do here is to ensure that I can see the same surface all the way along. Now when round wire is lovely and shiny, you can't tell if it's twisting or not, but with square wire, as you twist it, you'll be able to see a dull edge move before you see the next face. So when we're creating this form, we need to keep the same face of that square inwards going around the outside of that cabochon. So it is just slightly more challenging than using your round wire. If you have handled wire before and you've got some square wire, then give it a go, because I think it looks really smart with a square wire. Your other option, of course, is to do a little bit of cheating. Let's show you the cheating. Use round wire. Here we are with our round wire. We've made the shape that we know we're happy with. I've got a tiny steel block. I've got a very, very light, gosh, I don't even know how heavy this hammer is. It's very, very light indeed. What I'm going to do is to make sure that the shoulders are exactly where I want them to be. Let me just move out of the glare slightly. There we go. The shoulders sit side by side and I can get my cab into that position really nicely. So I'm going to hammer this now. I shall turn the sound down slightly. When you're hammering, it is really easy for the shape that you've created to become lost. What you will need to do as you've gone around just the first time, and you'll notice that I'm not hammering past those corners, I'm just getting the shape set around the centre. Need to make sure as frequently as possible that you're happy with the shape and form that you're creating. If that starts to wander, it's usually because instead of striking straight down, you're striking at a slight angle, and the wire is simply obeying what it thinks you want it to do, which is to spread outwards to one side or the other. So striking down as flat as possible, like so, is key in getting the wire to stay where you've put it. If you're tapping down and there's more pressure on one side of that hammer face than there is on the other, then the wire's going to spread unpredictably. So if we can keep that nice and still. Also, I quite like the fact that when I flip this over, there's a satinized finish from that steel block on the face of the metal. So quite often I will turn that over and try and get a bit of that satinized finish on both sides. Whilst I'm using a very light hammer and a small block and a reasonably light 18 gauge wire, I'm not going to be creating a very, very flat surface, but it's enough so that I get a really good strength and it will look a little bit more like a flat wire in the finished piece. So that's a halfway house. If you don't want to work with the square, but you don't want to have simply a round wire, and I'll show you what the round wire looks like with the half round attached to it in a little while. It's a different effect altogether. So we'll have some options at the end of today and you can decide which way you want to go. So let me get this block back out of the way and the hammer back over in the hammer home. Everything should have a home on your desk, even if it's organised chaos to everybody else's eye. As long as you know where it is, it's all good. So again, we're going to just take a look at our square wire now to make sure that the same face is sitting upwards towards you all the way around. Now, having a round mandrel is really useful at this stage, but you could use a lip balm if you needed to. So I'm going to take that single face of wire and I'm going to make sure that the same face touches my round mandrel. The wire will want to twist as you do this, so you'll need to just be aware that that is a risk. I'm going to pop the wire approximately where I think the size is needed, and then I'll pop the mandrel back out of the way and offer my cabochon into position. So you can see that my wire has indeed twisted, the square wire has indeed twisted. So what we need to do is tell it where we want it to be, and I want that same face of wire to be up all the way around. So you can tell it exactly what you want it to do by twisting it back into position. It's not the easiest thing in the world. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm pushing the face so that it sits flat upwards rather than sitting outwards, which is where it's gone a bit like a fast corner. We want it to sit up straight like a wall. So I'm going to take that wire and push that same face upwards, and I'm just rotating little by little until the whole thing sits exactly where I want it to. Now, by the time I've got this to sit into position, there will be tool marks on the design, and you may prefer to stick to a round wire. I simply wanted to show you a way that you can work with square wire today to achieve a slightly different look. Do feel free to cheat and give round wire a hammer. If you wanted to take that from an 18 gauge to a 16 gauge, that's also really fabulous design. looks really good. But you can see that it doesn't take too long to get the wire to sit exactly where you want it to. And then your challenge remains to get the sizing correct. So again, we're going to spend a little bit of time. You might need to open that out slightly. You might need to twist that wire so that it behaves exactly how you want it to. And eventually you'll have something that looks a little bit like this. So it's a case of applying some warmth. This is where our next curve is going to be, drawing that curve around so that it snuggles around the upper side of that beautiful, sultry, gorgeous smoky quartz. Have you guessed that I'm a huge fan of smoky quartz yet? It's a beautiful gem to work with. So again, a little bit of heat, and then we're going to start turning that second side in. Apologies if you heard my finger bone then. That time it was my nail, it's all good. So there we go. You're starting to get a shape that vaguely resembles that smoky quartz cab. You will need to just open and close and then put some right angles up at the top. So if I pop one in on the one side, we'll see how we're getting on. And this again is a process. It takes time. It takes time to get that perfect. We're actually not doing too bad considering we've not been here very long yet. Let me just pop that second angle in, again making sure that you're seeing the same face of that wire all the way around all the time. When it starts to twist and turn, you lose control of the design. So I'm just going to flatten that down, make sure I'm happy with that. It's on the wonk slightly at the moment, so I'll adjust that in just a second. So what you would need to do is just draw from one side and then push that in at the other side at the top until you get those shoulders centralised. And it is a case of very small movements very frequently until you end up with one which is just a little bit more correctly fitted. So I'm going to show you that you can work with round wire, hammered round wire or square wire, and each will look slightly different. So what we're going to do now is grab a length of that half round. Now this design will work with a lighter round wire as well. However, it looks absolutely stunning with a half round wire. So let's unspool a good, let's say 18 inches of that half round, and what you'll need to do is control that wire so that you pull that away without putting too much pressure or heat into it. We don't want to overstress the wire at this stage. We want it to be nice and fluid and pliable. So I've got a nice length of that 22 gauge half round to work with. So shall we go with the square wire? I'll show you how to set it on the square wire. The same kind of rules will apply on the hammered. And on the round wire, it will just be a little bit easier. So I'm going to find the centre of my length of half round wire. This again is around 18 inches and it's 22 gauge medium temper German style wire. With this, when you unspool that central section, we do need to find that centre and we do need access to it. So I'm just going to open that out ever so slightly by pressing against it so that I've got some space in the middle to work with. You'll find that you've got a domed side, which is the half round side, and you also have a flat side. Now the flat side is, if you have eyesight issues like myself, identifying which is which can be tricky, but my advice is that if you're looking at square wire, you can see the edges. So if you're looking at the underside, the flat side of your half round, you can see those edges. Whereas if you flip it over, it's very much smoother and it has a bit more gloss to it. And that's because it seems that you're looking at round wire. So that's how I identify it anyway. So I'm just going to open that central section out because those ends are starting to get a little bit tricky. In the centre of your half round, what we're going to do is lie that underneath with the flat side to the underside of your housing. So that will twist, so you'll just need to control that a little bit carefully. And what I'm going to do with the flat side against that frame wire, I'm going to wrap 1.5 times around down here at around about the 4 o'clock position. If this is a clock face, here's 12, here's 3, so maybe 4:30. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the flat side around the frame that we've created, pull the excess of wire through on the right, and pull that nice and firmly up. So what we've got is 1.5 circuits around that square wire, down at that 4:30 position, and that is really firmly against flat side to flat wire. So the flat side, or the underside as I like to think of it, is snuggled up super firmly against that shape that we've created to sit the cabochon inside. So I'm going to draw a straight line across the back underneath of our framework. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the left hand side, keeping a taut straight line. Now it needs to be lower. If you imagine again, this is 12, 3, 6, 9. It needs to be lower significantly than that 3 o'clock position. If you put this wire wrap up at the 3 o'clock position, your cabochon might splop right out of the bottom. I appreciate that's probably not a word. So pulling the flat side of my half round wire tautly against the back of the design, I'm going to wrap 1.5 times. I'm going to push, so you can see the shiny side is up now. Push that all the way through, draw the tail around, and very carefully pull that tightly up and over the top. Now what will happen with your half round wire is it might want to twist, so you are more than free to simply use a round wire if you are newer to wire working. This is a project which can be really simple. If you use your round wire, you can hammer it, you don't have to. And then if you use a lighter gauge round wire, again a 22 gauge, to wrap the cabochon into position, if you're using round wire, everything becomes just a little easier. If you fancy more of a challenge, then you can use half round and square. So what I'm going to do is show you what the whole project looks like if you're using round wire, to demonstrate what the next steps will be, and then we will go through step by step, continuing with that half round wrapping. So this is what we're looking to do. We're looking to create a harness into which our beautiful smoky quartz cab will slide up at the top and be securely contained down at the lower portion of the design. So if I just pop this next to the square and half round, this is hammered round with round. And what you'll see is that when you're using that half round, it looks as though you've recessed the wire into the gemstone, whereas with the round wire, it sits slightly proud. It's worth persevering with, rather, once you get a handle on a little bit more experience of wire working, but you do have the choice to make that with all round wire if that's your preference. I'm just going to pop this out of the way now, and we'll continue with that half round on the square wire frame. So I'm just going to pop that into position now, and what we're going to do is to take the flat side of that half round wire and rest it over the surface of the cabochon, which is resting inside that frame we've created, and I'm just going to push that wire so that it circles around the back of the frame like so. And when that springs away, you'll see that I've made a bend in that half round wire, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want a bend to be there so we can take the cabochon out of the way. I'm just going to pop that up there safely, but we can still see where that wrap needs to take place. So I'm going to push the flat side of that half round wire against the underside of the frame. I'm going to push the continuation of the half round wire up into the centre of that frame wire, draw it all the way through, and then pull that smartly around so that the flat side of my half round is always on the frame. Flat side sits on the frame wire, domed side of that wire sits up and outside. So I'd need to replicate that on the other side. So you can pop the cabochon back into position. You might need to just slightly readjust that lowest section of wire to make sure that it's sitting symmetrically. You can pop the cab back into position, draw that half round across the surface of the cab, and just push that down so that you get that little kink in the wire. It will spring up and away because it's a very springy wire. I'm just going to draw the other side of the half round up and out of the way for a second. And what we're going to do is pull that down so that that bend in the wire sits on the frame. And you'll notice that we're making that harness, it looks a bit like a slipper or a seatbelt array. We want that little dimple that we made in the wire to sit onto the frame, and drawing the rest of that half round all the way through and up the centre of the frame. So you can push that into position, draw that all the way through and around, and you can see once I push that wire across the back of the design, let me just draw this first side back down into position. You can see that we're creating a safe place for our lovely cabochon to sit safely inside. When your half round wire is on the back of the design, just to reiterate, the flat side is sitting against the frame that we created. And on the back of the design, it's always taut against that frame, so it's flat to the frame. On the front of the design, what we have is the rounded side of our half round wire outwards, and the flat side sits against the frame and the gemstones. If I just slide that down like a shoe in Cinderella's foot into the slipper, you'll see that that fits neatly into position. If I withdraw the gemstone again for getting towards the last time now, I'm going to draw the wires across the back and wrap them around the frame. Now we don't want these wires to be going too close up to the top just yet. We've got a little more work to do. So I've made a little cross down at the bottom. Looks a little bit like a flag, and I'm going to do the same up at the top. We're going to try and replicate this design here. So I'm going to push the flat side again against the frame, and that's coming just above the 3 o'clock mark. I'm going to push the wire through the gap in the middle, ensuring that I'm only ever taking the flat side to that framework. I need to do the same on the other side now. So this again is just above the 9 o'clock mark, if you imagine that this is our clock face. And I'm going to wrap that around the frame wire. Now this is, again, I will reiterate, simpler if you're going to use a round wire, but I did want to demonstrate with you using the trickier wires, the half round and the square, purely because it makes a really nice design. And if you're ready to take a next step in your wire wrapping, sorry about the noise of the wire, it's very springy. If you're ready to take that next step, then this is a really good way to have a go. If you're not ready to take that next step, then don't worry, we've got your back. You can just use the round wire and it's going to look pretty anyway. Let's have a look. This is the one I wanted to show you. I've got a couple of half-made pieces on the desk today. So this is made with that hammered frame that we created together a few minutes ago, and I've added on 22 gauge round wire. So you can see the differences in the aesthetics. This is all copper and this is silver and bronze. So let's pop that one back out of the way again. Now, if you have any smudges or smutty thumbprints, as I am bound to have, on your cab, now's a really good opportunity to give that a bit of a clean and a polish, just to get as much of those smutty fingerprints off as possible before sliding the cab down into position. By the time you've done the next 2 wraps, your cab is going to be safely ensconced in this frame wire, and we're going to move on to tying it off at the top. So if I draw that half round across the top of our cabochon, what we're looking to do is to secure it in position. So if I turn that back into true orientation, you'll see it's coming across at around about half past 1. I suppose. You don't want to be too much further north than that because you won't have the stability of holding the cabochon in position. Now what you need to do is ensure that your cab fits inside your frame, push the wire down onto the cab, and then what we're going to do here is take the tail of that wire, flat side inside, flat side to the frame, and we're going to draw that around. You can see I'm controlling the movement of that half round wire with my non-dominant hand to ensure that it doesn't twist and that it goes where I want it to, and then push that all the way across the back. So you can see that we're starting to gain complete control over the cabochon, and it's going to sit and stay into that position. Now I've got quite a lot of excess wire on this side, so what I'm going to do is just trim that away for a second, because otherwise it's going to keep hitting the camera. I would urge you, where possible, to leave as much wire as you possibly can for now, because you might want to change your mind about what you're going to do with it. I'm getting it out of the way because it's going to hit the camera again. So again, I'm taking the flat side of the wire across the surface of that gemstone, and I'm pushing it down at around about that 10:30 position, so equal and opposite, and I'm going to hold that in position whilst I bring the wire around flat side inside the frame. And again, I'm going to control the movement of that wire. This is the point in time that you might end up getting a little bit of wire here captured in where you don't want it. But we're just going to control that into position until it fits where you want it to fit. I'm then going to draw that across the back of the design and show you that we can now pass the shake test. So if you've never set a cabochon in wire, the shake test is really important. Something that you will have to do at the end of your designs. Yes, the camera's wobbling. That's because I'm really giving this a hearty shake, and that's because I want to show you that that cabochon shouldn't be going anywhere. Now, there are several more steps to go. What we're going to do with that short tail of wire is, for ultra security, I'm going to draw that across the back of the gemstone, and you can see we've still got the rounded side up, flat side to the gemstone, and I am just going to find a place to wrap that around the frame wire. So I'm going to take the end of the wire and I'm going to post that down between the frame and the gem, keeping the flat side of the wire, the flat side of the half round wire to that framework. I'm just going to push that through. It's currently catching on itself, which is really annoying. You can draw that all the way around, and I'm going to just give that one more turn of wire. And what this does, I will show you on the back in just a second. I'm going to bring that to the front and trim away the excess. Please take care when you're trimming here, because you might cut the bit that you don't want to cut. So look twice before you press that final bend. And then I'm just going to tuck that very end of the tail into the design underneath the preceding line of wire. So if I just flip that onto the back, you'll see that we have sealed our cabochon fully into position. What I'm going to do now is push the flat side of my half round onto the back of the gemstone and just hold that in position possession of control if you prefer, and just draw that upwards so that I can start circling it around one of those neck wires. So again, I want my flat side of that half round to be on the flat side of that frame wire. If you're working with round wire, you won't have to focus on this. Hence, it's a beginner's level tutorial with you using round wires. I'm flipping that over and just maintaining the round side of my half round outwards, the flat side against the frame. Now you can do whatever weave you fancy here. I think I'm going to go twice around both of those, and then I'm going to do once around one side. Now this is where you will need to focus on keeping the flat side of your half round to the flat side of that wire, because it will want to twist or hit the camera multiple times. So I'm going to wrap once around just the one side, and then I'm going to push that over the surface, and I'm going to wrap twice again around both of those wires, and then slide that up the centre, keeping the flat side to the frame wire. I'm going to wrap once around the opposite side this time, and you'll see that you can build up whatever kind of pattern you fancy. It's a bit like bandaging a mummy. I don't know if that's something that you do lots of, but that's the first thing that came to mind. So I've got 2 wraps around both, and then 1 wrap around one side, 2 wraps around both, 1 wrap around the other side. I quite like this pattern, so I might do that a couple more times. What I don't want to do is to draw those wires too close together, so I'm going to start separating them out. Now, because this wire has seen some action, I don't want to be forceful or brutal with it, so I'm going to just use a little bit of warmth and curvature to open those wires slightly outwards. The reason for this will become apparent shortly. So just getting those to open out, and then I'm going to continue with my wrapping. So once around the one side, and then once around the both. You can do whatever wrapping procedure you want. It's, again, I will say, trickier with the half round, but so much fun, and just looks so different to when you're working with round wire. So all I'm doing here is just continuing with that very, very same process, wrapping twice around both, and then once around one side before returning to the other side in exactly the same pattern. And then you'll just finish off on whichever side you fancy finishing off on. I think I might go another couple. It looks really pretty. Quite happy with that. Now what will happen with your half round is it will at some point want to twist. So you can just undo that a step if you need to. This is how to do it. Just get very, very gentle motions until you can flatten that out and draw it back around, and then continue on your merry way twice around the both, and then once around the other side. Now I think that that's quite enough of that little bandage wrap. So what I'm going to do is bring the wire to end in between the frame wires. So what I will do to ensure that I can do that is cut it just a very short distance past that frame wire on, which is currently the lowest of the two, and I'm going to push the wire so that it sits neatly and flatly against that square, and the tighter it is, the longer lasting your pattern will remain. So if you're still with me, do try the round wire first and then up your game to square and half round. I'm going to show you my low-key bail now and then talk you briefly through how you can make this into a bar design and add some chain. Now again, you will see that it is nice and secure and safe. You've secured your gemstone cabochon into the frame wire by crossing at the lower than the widest point and higher than the widest point. If you give that a nice shake, you'll see that that's not going to come out. I'm going to share with you now my unique low-key bail, which is this, which works really, really well just on a chain. But I'm also going to show you how you can add in some more details to that bar if you wish to. Now for this next section, what I'm going to do is straighten up the two wires, but they can be sitting outwards. They do need to be reasonably straight though. Ideally the same length, but don't worry, you can trim them slightly in a little while. Now I'm going to use my multi-step bail makers. You could use standard two-step bail makers, or you could use a round form like a pencil. What I'm going to do is put a forwards bend around about 45 degrees at the top of that woven section, and I'm going to make sure that my square wire is nice and flat, and I'm going to start rotating. I think I'm going to use number 4 today. I'm going to rotate around from about 1.5 inches away. Now the wire will want to twist because square wire does that, so you may need to just keep an eye on that. I'm going to bring that tail around one more time and just stick that up and away for a second. So you can see we've created a spring type design. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side now. Number 4. So we're going to start just slightly further away, bearing in mind the flat surface needs to be the same flat surface all the way along. So just control your movements. Small movements are better, even if you have to do many, many more of them, because it means that you will end up with a much more controlled finish. So again, let's just retract that slightly, pop that back in at an angle, and then push that tail through and around. Now you can achieve this with a round form such as a pencil or a mandrel. I love my multi-step bail makers. So let's flip this over to the front of the design. I'm just going to angle those out so that they're equal and opposite. You can open them out slightly if you want to, and then we're going to trim them so that they're the same length. Those little tails are the same length. Now, this is based on Loki's helmet. If you've never seen the comic book, he wears a helmet with horns that come out at a lovely angle with a bit of a curl to them. So that is what I based this original design on. Just get those to sit as funkily or as angled as you want to. And then we're going to use a round plier to just put the curl on the end of that helm. So you don't have to have them going all the way down, although it looks quite attractive if you can. And again, you will need to consider the angle that you're working with. So the square face of my wire is coming in this direction, and I want my curl to come away at 90 degrees. So you can bring that as far over the side as you want to. It's a little bit more challenging than with round wire. It's super easy with round wire. A little bit more challenging with that square. So you might want to reform that on your round form when you have a second. Let's just push that up for a moment. Now all I have done with this bar necklace is added in some antiqued silver hammered chain. And I've connected that with a wrapped loop on the one end. You can check out a dedicated tutorial on my YouTube channel for wrapped loops if you haven't seen me do them before. It's really quite simple. A bar necklace is basically a piece of bar or wire that runs at the bottom of either soft or beaded or chain or whatever you fancy. So the central section is firm and static, and then you have a more fluid section up at the top. That's all a bar necklace is. Mine happens to have a magnetic closure on one side, so it's asymmetric, which is really, really cool. I like that. And then in the centre, we've got our Loki bale and a selection of beads from the Into the Woods design. So there's loads of beads to work with. And all I've done, if I just grab a section of, where are you? There you go. Some 18 gauge wire. So for a piece like this, I would probably use about 9 or 10 inches of your 18 gauge wire. The definition of what wire you use for a bar necklace is the largest wire that goes through your chosen beads. So some gemstone beads are irregular, and what you will find is that you get a much larger drill access point on man-made beads, like so. So if you wanted to set one of these, what you will need to do is smooth your wire straight, as ever. Give that a lovely, lovely smooth so it's nice and easy to use. And also so that your beads have a chance of sliding on. In the example piece, I've used ever such a lot of mixed metals. There's silvers, bronzes, there's antique golds and antique silver as well as the bright silver. I really like mixing metals, but if you don't, then you don't have to at all. So let's just pop that up to the side for a second. Very, very easy, wrapped loop on either end, but to sit that central bead, what we're going to do is pop the wire through one side of my Loki split bale, and then we're going to choose a bead. Let's see, I don't know if they do, yes it does. So one of those beautiful smoky beads from the Dakota Stones collection within Into the Woods fits on this 18 gauge wire, which is absolutely fabulous news. So what I'm going to do is retract then the wire that I'm going to sit all of my beads on, until I can get the end through the second side of that Loki bale, and that is all there is to it. So you will find at this stage whether or not you've got your Loki bale even. You might want to just tweak that ever so slightly, just to show you what it looks like with beads behind the Loki bale in a different colour. I'm going to add a couple of pumpkin spacer beads just on either side. I think it's really attractive to have those mixed metals. As I say, you would want to spend a bit more time getting those lined up. So let's just bring the final piece down into position over the top of the one we've worked on together today. All I will do is add some extra beads either side, finish with a wrapped loop. You can have your closure at the top of your chain or whatever fabric you're using, t-shirt yarn, whichever you want to go for, or you can have it on the side. It's absolutely up to you. Don't let anybody tell you how to do it. Take your advices and then make your own way. So this is what it looks like if you use round and round wire. Quite attractive still. Slightly easier to work up. So you would just continue with a second crossover at the top end. Whatever weaving you fancy up the middle, and then split that to a Loki bale. So the wires that I've used to demonstrate today have been 18 gauge silver colour square medium temper German style wire, and that has made this surround and this surround. And I've added in half round bronze, also medium temper German style in 22 gauge to add the housing and the weaving, but you could very, very simply use whatever wire you fancy, whatever colour you fancy in round, 18 and 22 gauge. So there is your piece made from Into the Woods. So I hope that you've enjoyed Into the Woods with me today. Colour Alloy Into the Woods, featuring lots and lots of Jessie James beautiful beads and Dakota Stones, absolutely gorgeous gemstones. I am slightly enamoured with that smoky quartz. It's beautiful. I hope you've enjoyed today as much as I have, and I look forward to being back with you again very, very soon. My name is Jem. I'm here for Jessie James Beads, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.